There's a question underneath almost every conversation about artificial intelligence right now, and it almost never gets asked directly. Not, is this useful? Clearly, yes. Not, is it impressive? Obviously. The question is, what kind of thing is it exactly? And does the industry building it understand the difference between what they have and what they are charging for? My 3-year-old daughter threw a hard ball at her baby brother. It hurt him. Later, she threw a beach ball, and he laughed. Nobody explained mass, velocity, elasticity, or Newton's laws to her. She combined what she had just seen with everything she already knew and permanently updated her understanding of balls, force, and her brother. It cost nothing. It took no downtime, and she still has it. That is the moment that made me understand where we actually are with intelligence. A language model can describe that moment beautifully because it has read millions of descriptions of similar ones. But it cannot have one new experience, revise its own understanding, keep that revision permanently, and apply it for the rest of its life. Every conversation starts from the same frozen snapshot. Whatever you teach it evaporates when you close the tab. The chat app can save notes about you and paste them back in, but that is the notes doing the remembering. The model underneath never learned a thing. That is not an insult. It is a description of what kind of thing it is. Think of current AI as an extremely sophisticated koi pond. You dig a hole, install a liner, add a pump, filtration, oxygenation, and fish. Once you understand how to build one, you can scale it dramatically. Larger liner, enormous pumps, industrial filtration, thousands of sensors. Eventually, you have the largest and most impressive koi pond ever built. Now think of real intelligence as a small lake. It is not merely a giant koi pond. It is an ecosystem, and nobody installed any of it. It stores what happens to it, adapts, recovers, and changes its own behavior without anybody draining it and rebuilding it from scratch. That gap is roughly where we are with AI. More parameters, more GPUs, more training data, longer context windows, more inference compute. All of that is larger pumps and better filters. It genuinely improves the pond. GPT-7 could be vastly better than GPT-5, while still being the exact same type of engineered system. That system has a name, a transformer. It came out of a paper in 2017, and people have been tuning it and bolting clever things onto it ever since. The thing being scaled is, at bottom, a pile of numbers, hundreds of billions of them, called weights. When training ends, they are fixed. Every conversation runs against the same frozen pile. Start with the water, because the water is the data. A koi pond is filled from a hose. Municipal water collected somewhere else, treated, adjusted, poured in before the fish ever arrive. That is a training set. Billions of pages scraped from the internet, filtered and cleaned, pumped in exactly once. Then the hose gets turned off. Whatever made it into the water is everything the fish will ever know. That is why the model you talk to has a date stamped on its knowledge cutoff. A lake drinks from a watershed. Rain, snowmelt, groundwater, arriving untreated and unscheduled for the entire life of the lake. That is experience. The hardball leaving my daughter's hand was watershed water. Nobody collected that moment. It arrived, it changed her, and the next water landed on the change. Nutrients work the same way. In a pond, you buy them in a bag, measure doses on a schedule, decided by a person standing outside the pond, deciding what it needs. That is reinforcement learning from human feedback. People rate the model's answers, and the model gets nudged toward the ones they liked. In a lake, nutrients cycle. Things live, die, decompose, and feed the next thing, with no external input at all. Nobody stood outside my daughter's experiment holding a scorecard. Her brother cried, and that was the whole rating. Meanwhile, the climate does whatever it wants. A pond keeper holds it off with heaters and shade cloth. That is every patch that keeps a frozen model feeling current. A lake sits in the weather, and everything in it shifts with the seasons. The fish are the intelligence. Everything up to here has been plumbing and water and weather. In a koi pond, the fish are the product. Every component exists to keep them alive, and they contribute nothing to keeping the pond running. Turn off the pump, and they die within a day. They are cargo, held in suspension by machinery they take no part in. That is exactly what a model is right now. In a lake, the fish are a core component. They eat the insects eat the algae feeds on what the dead fish left behind. Remove the fish, and the lake becomes a different lake. The intelligence is not sitting inside the system, being maintained by it. The intelligence is part of what keeps it going. In a lake, nobody knows what is in there. You find things you did not stock and could not have predicted. That has a name in this field: emergence. And the pond has honestly earned that word too. Nobody taught these models to translate languages or to talk themselves through a hard problem step by step. Those abilities just showed up. Scale the pond, and the fish start doing tricks nobody trained. For a decade, that has been the most valuable and least controllable property in the entire industry. But look at what keeps emerging. New tricks from the same fish. Nature invents species. A koi pond has never produced a new kind of anything. 10 years of scaling have produced an astonishing number of tricks and 0 new species. What everybody is actually waiting on is a new species. Then there is the part that is almost too on the nose to be true. Koi are carp, the same drab brown things clogging every river on Earth. Wild carp are ugly, close to unkillable, thriving in water that would end most fish. Koi were bred from them over centuries, selected on one criterion: how much a human being enjoys looking at them. The result is spectacular, worth 6 figures for a champion, and would be dead in a week without you. That is reinforcement learning from human feedback, described exactly. Take something shaped by consequences and reshape it around approval. You get something far more beautiful and considerably less able to survive. Which is why koi are not an insult. They are worth an absurd amount of money. They are genuinely impressive, and you cannot live off them. Nobody has ever fed a family on koi. In a lake, you eat the fish. What we have now is ornamental value, enormous and not yet caloric. Put all of that together, and you get the list of things real general intelligence probably needs and does not currently have. Persistent memory, continuous learning, causal understanding, contact with the physical world, the ability to absorb one important experience without rebuilding the whole thing from scratch. My 3-year-old daughter had all 5 of those before she could spell her own name. The pond is a great pond. AI has enormous real value, and calling the whole industry fake or worthless makes no sense. The bubble is somewhere else. Everybody serious already knows the pond is not the lake. The researchers know it, and the labs know it, even when they do not admit it. The bet for the last 4 years has been that somebody would figure out the lake while the money was being spent, and that the timing would roughly work out. That has not happened. There are research directions that each solve a piece of this. State space models, the Mamba line of work, give a system something closer to a running internal state instead of rereading its entire conversation from scratch every time. Helpful for long conversations, useless for remembering last month. Test time training lets a model adjust its own weights a little while it is actually working on your problem. In most versions, those adjustments get thrown away the moment the job ends. Joint Embedding Predictive Architectures, JEPA, are Yann LeCun's program. He shares the Turing Award, computing's version of the Nobel Prize. He has spent years saying bluntly that language models are an off-ramp rather than the road, and that what you need is a system that builds its own internal model of how the world works. World models, what Fei-Fei Li's group is building, try to give a system an intuitive physical picture of how objects behave, instead of a very good description of how they behave. She built ImageNet, which is more or less the event that started all of this, and she left to build world models instead. And then there is Ilya Sutskever. He co-created AlexNet, the model whose 2012 win made the entire field change direction. He drove the research behind reasoning models. He left OpenAI in 2024, went quiet for 2 years after founding SSI, Safe Superintelligence, and has talked publicly about treating feelings and emotions as something like a value function. Nobody outside his building knows what he is actually building. So 3 of the handful of people most responsible for the pond have been saying, in 3 different vocabularies, that it is not going to scale to a self-sustaining lake. 2 of them said it out loud for years. The third said it by leaving. They are not fringe voices. Every one of those research directions is real, and several are promising. And none of them, alone, is close. Nobody has managed to blend them into one coherent architecture that works. 4 years of very smart people and enormous funding, and the pieces are still sitting separately on the workbench. Now put the money next to that. Hundreds of billions of dollars of concrete, land, power contracts, and chips. The chips, to be fair, have held their value far better than anyone predicted. Older NVIDIA cards that were supposed to be nearly worthless rent for more than they did 2 years ago, because the long tail of smaller projects absorbs everything the frontier labs stop wanting. Hardware is not the fragile part. The fragile part is the financing. Revenue projections that only add up if the ecosystem arrives. Debt that comes due on a schedule the research does not care about. Chip makers investing billions into their own customers, who spend it buying chips. Valuations priced off the lake. The pond, the actual product, the thing people pay for today, is a good business. It is not a business large enough to service what has been borrowed against the lake. They have built everything you can build around a lake, except the lake itself. Docks, boat ramps, a marina already taking reservations, all of it arranged around a hole with no water in it. And look at where the money went. It is not funding the search for the discovery. It is funding the infrastructure you would need after the discovery. Normally, when you do not know how to do something, you spend money finding out. Small teams, cheap experiments, arguments, dead ends, graduate students. That is exactly how the breakthroughs in this field have always arrived. The Transformer came out of a paper with 8 authors and a modest compute budget. State space models came out of a paper with 2. Nobody has ever invented anything important by buying more electricity. And I know exactly how that sounds, because for about a decade, buying more electricity was the discovery engine of this field. That is what emergence was. Scale went up, and abilities nobody predicted kept falling out, and it really paid. But go back and look at what fell out. Tricks. Better fish every single year, and never once a new kind of fish. No amount of purchased electricity has ever produced a system that is one experience smarter on Tuesday than it was on Monday. Run an experiment for 10 years, and the thing that never happens is also a finding. You cannot purchase the insight. You can only purchase the ability to run it at scale once somebody has it, and essentially all of the capital has gone into the second thing. Now, the case that all of this is wrong. The blend does not have to be finished. It only has to be demonstrated. If somebody has the equivalent of GPT-1 on a genuinely new architecture right now, a small, rough version that proves the design actually works, that is not general intelligence next year or the year after. But it is more than enough to justify continuing to pour concrete, because a data center takes years to build anyway. The discovery and the capacity could land at roughly the same time. That is Jevons paradox at work too. as long as the answer still runs on GPUs. Making intelligence cheaper has historically meant buying much more of it, not less. And somebody is going to say railroads or the internet in 1999. Those examples do not undercut the argument. They are the argument. British railway mania in the 1840s was a catastrophic, fortune-destroying bubble, and it also built the rail network that ran an empire. The investors got wiped out. The infrastructure stayed. A bubble and a world-changing technology are frequently the same event, viewed from two different balance sheets. If the road to the lake runs through weights that change from experience, then every promise currently being made about enterprise data quietly stops being coherent. "We do not train on your data" is the entire foundation of enterprise AI trust right now. In every contract, the answer to every security review. And it only makes sense while the model is a frozen snapshot that somebody else owns and you rent. The moment a model learns continuously, training on your data is not a violation of the arrangement. It is the arrangement. So you stop renting a pond. You have your own. And because the fish finally learn from the water they live in, it has some lake in it. Your water is your data, and your fish grew up in it. What is in your water, no competitor has, and no vendor can reproduce. Having your own pond does not mean starting from nothing either. You buy fish from somebody whose pond produced better ones. That is roughly what distillation already is. And if your fish are exceptional, you sell them to companies whose water never produced the same thing. That is the market on the other side of this. Not one enormous rented pond. A great many ponds, each with its own water, trading fish. Here is what we actually have. The tools are going to keep getting better. The pond is going to keep being useful. The chips are going to keep being worth something. And a great many people are going to lose a great deal of money on the distance between what the build-out cost and what it earns before the bill comes due. Some of those data centers will end up being extremely valuable to a company that does not exist yet, at a price that would horrify the people paying for them now. Maybe the blend arrives next year, and everything lines up beautifully, and I would not bet against smart people for very long. But at some point, building a bigger pond and creating an ecosystem become two different engineering problems, and the money has been spent as though they were the same one. One last thing, because this opened with a 3-year-old, and it would be dishonest to leave her out of the close. She runs on about 20 watts and a peanut butter sandwich. Her substrate was not cheap either. It takes constant food, constant attention, and roughly 25 years to finish manufacturing. Behind it sit hundreds of millions of views of nervous systems getting selected by consequences, with continuous unfiltered exposure to physics the entire time. Nobody dug that hole. Nobody installed the liner. But it was not free. So the honest version is not that intelligence is cheap. It is that nobody has ever built one any other way.